The holidays are approaching, so Merry Christmas to you from me. This is Jurgen Rasmussen, by the way, offering you a psychological survival guide for the holidays. Now, it's a fact of life for most of us that quality relationships, spending time with people we care about, whether that be family or friends, is one of the greatest sources of joy and happiness and feeling connected. At the same time, spending time with people we have attachments to can also be a great source of despair, misery, depression, anxiety, anger, and shame, right? And disappointment. So, how to navigate these waters? Well, here are some ideas that many of my clients and me personally have found quite useful over the years. So, I hope that these will resonate with you. So, first of all, how do you deal with a person you perceive to be difficult? How to deal with a difficult person? Well, there's two things I think to really keep in mind here. One is healthy boundaries, and the other one is realistic expectations. Let's start with the realistic expectations part. So, the way you get to know about your own expectations is when you get emotionally activated. So if you get activated around your mother or your father or your sister or your kids or whatever it might be, that shows you that you have an expectation in that moment which is different from how things seem to unfold. So the vast majority, if not all, of our, let's call it psychological suffering in life is due to a single thought. And that thought is that it shouldn't be this way or it should be different, right? So if you, in the wise words of the late Albert Ellis, is shooting all over yourself or masturbating, as in life must be a particular way or people must approve of me, and you know, if you have strong musts and shoulds about how people should be or how life should be or how you should be, then every time someone doesn't live up to the directives of the dictator, you're going to have, strong emotional activation. Now, even if you're not masturbating and shooting hard, any expectation you have which isn't met is going to activate you to the extent that you believe in the expectation and take it seriously. Here's the main mistake most of us make when it comes to expectations. We tend to use ourselves, our own habits, our own personality tendencies, our own ways of meaning making as the bedrock for the expectations that we apply to other people. And that works really great if that person is very similar to you in terms of how they make meaning or understand life or themselves. But what you really want to do is you want to use the other person's behavior over time as the source for your expectations. So let's say that you have a family member who uh, seems very opinionated and has very strong opinions on stuff that's different from you, for example. If you go around expecting that person to be more humble or more open to your views, and every time they tend to shut you down, you'll get frustrated and annoyed. But if you can expect the person to be that way, meaning whenever I've spent time with this person in the past, that's how they tend to operate. If you can expect them to be that way, then you take the sting out of that. So you want to use the other person's behavior over time as the basis for your expectations. So let's say, for example, that you have a family member who one day they're your best friend and they're sweet and charming and warm and nice. And the next day they're extremely aloof and ice cold and dismissive. And you never quite know where they might be. Well, in that case, expect that. Expect that, when I show up for family holidays, this person could be very welcoming and very warm and very sweet, or I could get this very aloof, ice cold demeanor. I don't know. I'm going to expect that I could get a little bit of both. And then, of course, it's up to you to decide what relationship you might want to have to this particular person. So, if you're experiencing a lot of frustration, a lot of disappointment, and a lot of shame, here's a very practical exercise that I recommend you doing. And it simply is to write down your most important expectations of that particular person. And the way you know what you expect is to just look for when you get activated around that person. That will flesh out your expectation. So write those down so that you have them on piece of paper. And then ask yourself the question, to what extent are these expectations based upon me using my own personality, habits, preferences as a source? And to what extent are they based on that person's actual behavior over time? And then what you want to do is you want to adjust the expectations so it matches the other person's behavior. So let's say that you have someone who's always 30 minutes late. Well, expect the person to be 30 minutes late because that's how they operate. And if they change for the worse or the better, you adjust your expectations based upon what they show you over time. To the extent that you can do that, you will dramatically reduce your own reactivity and your own stress levels. It's not about high or low expectations, it's about realistic expectations for that particular person. I've mentioned this before in some videos, but one really humorous example for me has been, let's say I get a client and a female client who's kind of artistic, and there's colors and feelings, and they like to talk about their dreams and their aspirations and their inner life, and they marry a stereotypical engineer or economist, right? And they come in and they say, oh, I don't think Benjamin loves me because he won't share his deepest self with me. I've shared my hopes, my fears, my dreams, my aspirations, and he just won't go there. And that means he doesn't love me, which could be the case, of course. I don't really know Benjamin. But I'll often ask them, I'll say, has it ever occurred to you that Benjamin might not have a deep self to share? Maybe he's a pretty concrete guy who just doesn't operate at that level of abstraction. You might be expecting a poet, but that might not at all be where that person operates. So if you can do that, that's great. Now, here's the second part. The second part is to have healthy boundaries. And by healthy boundaries, I mean, just with yourself checking in and knowing what you stand for, what your values are, what you're willing to be a part of, what you're not willing to be a part of, and to take responsibility for your own inner life, your own thoughts, your own feelings, and to allow other people to be responsible for their own inner life, their own thoughts, their own feelings. A lot of clients are simultaneously being under responsible and over responsible. So the under responsible part is the victim role. You make me feel, you disappoint me, you frustrate me. That kind of outsourcing of claiming that the other person is the source of one's own emotional state. The over responsible part is the whole I can make you happy, or being guilty if someone else isn't content. This is a part of over responsibility, right? Now, you can hold yourself responsible for your inner life and hold someone else responsible for their inner life without being an asshole. You can still be a socially oriented human being who might ask, what am I doing or not doing that might be contributing to this? You can still do that. So a great way of having healthy boundaries then is if you can make a distinction between your inner world of thoughts, feelings, opinions, values, and another person's inner world. And when you start to get frustrated and disappointed or shameful, just ask yourself, whose world am I in? And you'll discover that a lot of the time you are in other people's inner business, you know, making dictates for them about what they should care about and what they should think and what they should value. But you're in the wrong person's world. That's the problem. If you really look at it, you'll see that a lot of your inner stress is the result of you being a dictator. Look, the people in your life, your father, your mother, your spouse, your kids, your cousins, your brother, whatever, they see what they see. They hear what they hear. They believe what they believe. They understand whatever they understand. They care about whatever they care about. They are wherever they are, right? What we do as crazy maniacs, as dictators, is that we uninvited step into their mental world and we start to make up ideas of don't see what you see what I've decided you're supposed to see. Don't care about what you care about what I've determined that you should care about. You know, don't do what you want, do what I want. Don't hear what you hear what I've decided you're supposed to hear. Don't believe what you believe what I think you should believe. And then we hold other people responsible for triggering us and being the source of our distress when they don't act in accordance to the rules we have set for them that they never agreed to begin with. This is this is madness, right? And almost all of us, myself included quite often, engage in this. But this is poor I you sorting. These are unhealthy boundaries. So learn to check in and go, whose business am I in? And you'll discover that a lot of the time, if you're stressed and neurotic, you're in the wrong person's business. Come back to your own business. And remember this, unless someone pins you to the floor or does something like that, or the state comes by and they take your car because you haven't paid property tax or whatever it might be, all other people ever really do is give you information. Now that sounds kind of clinical and unsexy, but it's true. All other people ever really do is they show up and they give you information. They essentially say, look, given what I believe and think, this is how life looks to me. And then it's the story we create about that, what we think that means for us, and whatever ideas we have about how that person should make sense out of life that we experience. So, again, all other people ever really do is they show up and they give you information. They say, look, given what I believe and think, here's how life looks to me. And it's the story that we create about what we think that means. It means for us. That becomes our felt experience. If you can if you can acknowledge being the storyteller, then you'll see that you can always challenge your story, modify it, question it, and or even see that it's a story to begin with. And all you ever do then is show up to other people and kind of say, look, given what I believe and think, here's how life looks like to me. And then other people will create stories about what they think that means for them and how they think you should be, right? And they might hold you responsible and accountable for whatever distress that they're experiencing. So meditate on that. That offers more psychological flexibility. And also remember this: people do what they do given the thinking that looks real to them. I'll say that one more time. I mean, people do what they do given the thinking that looks real to them. Based upon what this person believes and the thinking that looks real to them, it makes complete sense for that person to be acting however they're acting. And they're going to act that way until something looks different to them, until their thinking shifts. Now, that might happen in 30 seconds. That might happen as soon as their mood lifts or as soon as they enter in another emotional state, right? It's not it's not personal. Most of this stuff is not done to you. It's just that's how life looks given the thinking that looks real to that person. As a matter of fact, to be completely honest with you, people are doing the only thing they could do at any particular moment. They're doing what they're doing based upon what looks real to them. Whatever idea we or they or others come up with about how they should be different is always a fantasy. It can be a nice fantasy, but it's important to remember that it's always a fantasy. Most of the stuff that people around you struggle with is really their own bullshit, but they'll be inclined to blame you for it. And that's the thinking that looks real to them, right? Now, here's something else to remember too. Everyone is the hero of their own story. This, I think, is always true. We all have a left hemisphere inner interpreter that works like a lawyer or a press secretary that always spins a story that makes us seem smart, reasonable, kind, good-hearted, and to to make that always appear to be the case, we will construct other people to appear in ways that reinforces how we want to view ourselves. This turns all of us into hypocrites. It turns all of us into hypocrites. It's not that we're being hypocritical towards each other on purpose. This is a function of the design. There's all these biases, that flow from this. For example, the tendency to judge other people based upon the outcome and to judge ourselves based upon intentions, for example. We tend to claim credit for successes and abdicate responsibility for failures, for example. Even people who are the biggest victim are always the hero in the story because they are the ones who have suffered the most and who are still standing. No one's suffered more than them, and the world hasn't seen their talents, and they're entitled, and so on and so forth. So even those are also always the hero in their own story. Now, let me offer this too, finally, and that is that I'll offer a quote from Thomas Sauce, the late psychiatrist, the foremost critic of psychiatry in the world. And he said that a friendship or relationship is two people who have agreed to uphold each other's mythologies. Now, I don't think for a moment that he really believes that that's all a friendship is, but I think he's onto something in the sense that we all have a self concept. We all have a story about who we are, right? And as my friend, it then seems like your job to supply that story. So if you supply and offer ammunition for how I want to see myself as the one who's right or smart or kind or loving or whatever, then I'll do the same for you. And we're good friends, right? But if one or both people challenge that narrative, then all hell very often breaks loose, right? So a lot of conflict, I mean, some of it is practical and personality based, but a lot of it is also identity based. We demand others to see us a particular way, to kind of supply ammunition for how we want to see ourselves, or we demand that other people act in accordance with our projections so that we can experience ourselves in a particular way. In other words, you're always more full of shit than you realize. And this is, of course, true for me as well. Self deception runs rampant. So to sometimes look at, what's the story I'm creating here about who this other person is for me to remain the good guy, for example, in this situation. And to just look at that, you know, to just have a look at that. If you're getting furious about how judgmental, for example, or narrow-minded someone else might be, and they might very well be, right? There's also simultaneously often us having more of that going on internally. Like we're judging that person harshly for not being more open-minded, or we have a narrow view of the person that we kind of demand that the person conform to. Finally, I'll offer this. Remember that adult relationships are voluntary. Adult relationships, meaning relationships between adults, are voluntary. Now, some of you might say, "Are you kidding me? My relationship to my boss isn't voluntary. I have to go to work." Well, they're voluntary. You may not be willing to suffer the consequences of ending certain relationships, and some of those can be painful. But at the same time, adult relationships are voluntary. You don't, if people in your life seem difficult to you, it's really smart to use that as an opportunity to do some inner work, to look at your own expectations, look at the stories you're telling, see if you can find those shadow elements inside. And sometimes you might be dealing with people who expect things of you, uh, expect you to be in a particular way, or to self censor in ways you're not willing to, for example. Or you might be around people who seem to exploit you or manipulate you, or they might be violent, or they might be constantly rude, or whatever. And remember that these relationships, even family relationships, are on a voluntary basis. You don't have to spend time with people, even if you're related to them. It's perfectly okay to let some people go. I've often I've often thought about this, when seeing clients, because and this is tricky because if you ever seen couples, you can listen to one person in the couple tell a story and they seem reasonable, right? And the other person seems like a prick. But then if you listen to the other person, they also always seem reasonable, right? Or often seem reasonable. Um, so this is always kind of tricky, but it has occurred to me throughout the years that a lot of people experience a lot of pain in their life by trying to stay connected to people who might not want the best for them, or who might be treating them quite badly. And they often have this idea that they have to stay in those relationships because they're family. That's worth at least challenging, you know. It's quite interesting to look at. Let's say you have a woman who gets beaten up by her husband in a relationship that she has chosen. This is a chosen relationship, right? Then friends might very often say, leave him, encourage support to leave, you know. But if someone's treated really poorly in relationships they haven't chosen, family relationships, we often treat it as a kind of cardinal sin to break those off. And that doesn't that seems strange to me. Just because you share some DNA does not mean that you have an obligation for life to having to spend time or holidays with this particular person. So that can be useful to contemplate that you are actually choosing to be there, and all adult relationships are in fact chosen. And when people make New Year's resolutions, and I'm not a fan of that, but it's very often about quitting smoking or quitting alcohol or starting exercises or something like that. But sometimes perhaps ending certain relationships and cutting certain ties might also, for some people, some of the time, be a great idea. And finally, remember this, the happiest people tend to be the most generous people. The happy people tend to be the grateful people, and the people who do their best to see the best in others while having good boundaries, right? So cultivate loving kindness, cultivate compassion, wishing the best for other people, cultivate gratitude, like really reflect on the wonders of life and all you have to be grateful for, and do your best to actually be generous with other people, and to have more acceptance of how they might see the world without taking that personally. So I hope some of this stuff was useful to you. As always, if you would like to make certain changes in your life and you're wondering whether you and I could be a good fit, I invite you to contact me at provocativehypnosis.com. If you're looking to learn the psychological illusion model, know that the next seminar is going to be on February the 15th and 16th. It's online in 2025. It's going to be hosted by Ayether and alchemy.net. I'll put both websites, links to both websites down below. As always, thanks for listening.